Hi, this is Michael again. I serve as a spokesperson for Nehemiah Reset. Today I want to talk to you about the second book of Corinthians. Paul's second letter to the Corinthians discusses some of the things previously addressed, but also deals with new issues. While 1 Corinthians called for believers to be unified with each other, in this letter Paul urges the church to be unified with him in his ministry. Paul's opponents were undermining his work, claiming that his suffering, chapter 11 verses 24 to 29, proved he was not a true apostle. Paul responds that his suffering highlights his dependence on Christ, as it points to Christ's strength rather than his own. 2 Corinthians includes stirring perspectives on gospel ministry, chapters 2 to 5, encouragements to holy living, chapters 6 to 7, and instructions about giving, chapters 8 to 9. Paul wrote this letter from Macedonia a year after writing 1 Corinthians, about AD 56. More than any of Paul's other letters, 2 Corinthians conveys the words of a pastor. Paul has had a rocky relationship with the Corinthian believers, but he continues to patiently love them like a father. 2 Corinthians chapter 12 verses 14 to 15. Now, as some question his authority, Paul preaches a gospel of reconciliation, characterized by making important but hard decisions. Paul had founded the Church of Corinth around AD 50 to 51 during his second missionary journey. After staying about 18 months and some unspecified additional period, Acts chapter 18 verses 11 to 17, he continued with other missionary work. Occasionally, he would receive troubling reports about the Corinthians, prompting him to write them letters. Paul sent at least 4 letters to Corinth, an initial letter that is now lost, 1 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 9. The letter we know as 1 Corinthians, another lost letter described as Paul's severe letter to Corinth, 2 Corinthians chapter 2 verses 3, 4, and 9. Compare 2 Corinthians chapter 7 verses 8 and 12, and the letter we know as 2 Corinthians. Sometime after writing 1 Corinthians, Paul likely sent Timothy to Corinth, 1 Corinthians chapter 16 verses 10 and 11. Paul was on his third missionary journey at the time and had originally intended to travel from Ephesus to Macedonia and then head south to Corinth, 1 Corinthians chapter 16 verses 5 to 8. Instead, he made a short visit directly to Corinth, only to have a sorrowful visit there, 2 Corinthians 2 verse 1, 12 verse 21, 13:2. This painful visit prompted him to write his severe letter, 2:3, 4. From Corinth, he went to Macedonia, where he wrote 2 Corinthians chapter 2 verse 13, chapter 7 verse 5, chapter 9 verse 2, likely sometime during AD 55 to 57. In Macedonia, Paul had received a positive report from his associate Titus about the Corinthians. His severe letter had essentially worked, chapter 7 verses 6 to 10. However, 2 Corinthians shows that Paul's attempts to persuade the Corinthians to follow Jesus' ways instead of the ways of their culture were still very much in progress. See the introduction to 1 Corinthians. Later in Paul's life, he returned to Greece for 3 months, likely to Corinth, Acts chapter 20 verses 2 and 3. It is during this time that Paul probably wrote Romans, Acts chapter 20 verse 3 to chapter 21 verse 16. 2 Corinthians reflects the standard form of a Greco-Roman letter, with an introduction, 2 Corinthians chapter 1 verses 1 to 11, a body, chapter 1 verse 12 and chapter 13 verse 10, and a conclusion, chapter 13 verses 11 to 14. The first part of the body, chapter 1 verses 12 to chapter 2 verse 11, contains Paul's defense of his conduct toward the Corinthians, specifically his reason for having not visited them again after his painful visit. Paul then explains the nature of his ministry, chapter 2 verse 12 to chapter 7 verse 16. He also brings up the issue of his collection for the impoverished Jerusalem church, chapter 8 verse 1 to chapter 9 verse 15 in light of God's generosity toward the Corinthians. Paul wants them to exercise generosity in supporting their fellow believers financially. Finally, Paul defends his authority as an apostle against people in Corinth who were questioning it, chapter 10 verse 1 to chapter 13 verse 10. 2 Corinthians can be divided into 5 different areas. These are 1. Introduction and benediction, 1:1:11. 2. Paul's personal defense, 1:12 to 2:11. 3. Paul's defense of his ministry, 2:12 to 7:16. 4. The collection for the Jerusalem church, 8:1, 9:15. 5. Preparation for Paul's visit, 10:1, 13-13. 2 Corinthians is about reconciliation, making difficult choices about toxic relationships, and separating from sinful behavior. Paul had a strained relationship with the Corinthians, and some church members had questioned his motives and authority, saying that a true apostle would act more boldly. Chapter 10. These people were being divisive, but Paul was still hoping for reconciliation with the church, a possibility that existed because Jesus had reconciled these believers to God. Chapter 5, verse 17-21. But it seems that this reconciliation meant the Corinthians separating from the so-called super-apostles, and it meant separating from sinful behavior in general. Chapter 6, verses 14 to 7:1. Chapter 11, verses 1-9. Paul does not respond to his critics by talking about his importance or influence. Instead, he points to his meekness and suffering, the very things that his opponents were criticizing, as signs that he was faithfully preaching the message about Jesus. Chapter 11, verses 16-33. Paul bears his heart to the Corinthians, hoping that they will recognize his sincere concern for them. Chapter 6, verses 11-13. Paul's interest in the collection for Jerusalem church also is about reconciliation. If God's people everywhere are brought together in Christ as the people of God, then they should care about each other. If one group is suffering, the other should make sacrifices to meet their needs. Chapter 8, verse 14. Like Paul and the Corinthians, modern-day Christians are no strangers to conflict. We often can be deceived into thinking that worldly wisdom and power are the way to accomplish anything of value. Instead, Paul tells us to look to the example of Jesus, who is light shining in darkness. Chapter 4, verses 1-6. I hope this gives you a quick summary of the book of 2 Corinthians and the key ideas contained therein. To learn more about other books of the Bible, visit our website at nehemiahreset.org or our rumble.com channel. If you want to support us, like this video and subscribe to our weekly newsletter detailing our recent videos by subscribing at nehemiahreset.org/email. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Hi, this is Daniel again. The previous video was sponsored by Nehemiah Reset, a 501c3 Bible-believing organization. Our mission is to assist Christians in developing a stronger biblical worldview as it pertains to relevant cultural and biblical issues. We seek to inform Christ followers, equip them, and mobilize them into action to vote their biblical values and to actively engage in our culture locally and at the national level. We are committed to help Christians and non-believers to develop a better biblical worldview. Nehemiah Reset produces videos and ebooks to assist believers and explorers in developing a biblical worldview when it comes to cultural and biblical issues. We produce videos on key topics like public school indoctrination, the woke agenda, sex education, equity and inclusion, climate change, immigration, religious freedom, and lessons that can be learned from key subjects in the Bible. To learn more about Nehemiah Reset or to watch our latest videos, go to our website at nehemiahreset.org or our rumble.com channel. We produce new videos every week. To get a free weekly list of our latest videos, sign up for our weekly newsletter by signing up at nehemiahreset.org/email. You can support our website by liking our videos, subscribing to our channel, or providing donations to help us advertise for new subscribers. Thanks for your help in growing God's kingdom and bringing more people to Christ. Thank you for your support and help. Have a great day.